The pastor said, "You're in Texas, now it's a local."
The auditorium lights glistened off the polished stage, casting an almost heavenly glow over the thousands of eager faces gathered in Houston. Joel Osteen's church, known worldwide for its grandeur and its message of positivity, was filled to the brim. Cameras from countless networks lined the aisles, their red lights blinking like silent eyes, ready to capture every second of what promised to be one of the most unusual encounters in modern history. For the first time, President Ibrahim Traoré of Burkina Faso, the young leader who had shaken Africa and unsettled the corridors of Western power, was sitting across from America's most influential televangelist. Nobody knew what was about to happen. Nobody could predict the weight of the words that would soon fall like thunder into the still air. Joel Osteen, smiling as always, began with his warm Texan tone. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are blessed tonight. We are joined by a man who has inspired millions, a man of courage, a man of change. Please welcome President Ibrahim Traoré." The audience clapped politely, some curiously, some skeptically. For many of them, Traoré was just another African leader they had heard little about, except for rumors of his fiery speeches and his resistance against Western dominance. But when he finally stood, the hall fell silent. His presence was magnetic, unshakable. He didn't smile. He didn't wave. He simply stood tall, his military jacket unbuttoned, his eyes piercing through the bright lights. "I thank you," Traoré began, his voice calm but layered with power. "I thank you for allowing me into this place. But I will not come here to entertain. I will not come here to flatter. I have come here to speak truth, even if truth is uncomfortable." Joel, maintaining his composed grin, replied, "That is exactly why we're here tonight, Mr. President. To hear your truth." The audience clapped again, but Traoré lifted his hand, signaling silence. And it was then, at that very moment, that the atmosphere changed. Traoré leaned slightly forward, his voice deepening. "In my country, Christianity and Islam live side by side. But too often, both have been used as weapons of manipulation. Too often, religion has been twisted into chains rather than wings. And I will not stand silent when I see leaders of faith, whether in Africa, America, or anywhere else, turning the gospel into a business, turning salvation into a product to be sold." The crowd gasped. Joel Osteen's signature grin faltered for the first time. He tried to interject, but Traoré did not stop. "Christianity, at its core," Traoré continued, his words slicing through the heavy air, "was never meant to be a theater. Jesus Christ did not die for his name to be used to build empires of wealth. He did not suffer on the cross for his message to be reduced to motivational speeches. Christianity is not about comfort, it is about sacrifice. It is not about mansions, it is about humility. It is not about stages and lights, it is about truth and struggle." Murmurs spread across the audience. Some clapped in agreement, others shook their heads. Joel shifted in his chair, visibly uncomfortable, but forced himself to keep his tone light. "Mr. President," he said softly, "we believe in spreading hope. We believe in lifting people up. Surely, there's nothing wrong with positivity." Traoré turned, his eyes locking directly onto Osteen. "Hope without truth is deception. Positivity without accountability is poison. You preach to millions, Joel. You preach to people broken, hungry, desperate. And instead of giving them the fire of truth, you give them cotton candy. Sweet words, empty promises. Tell me, when was the last time you spoke about justice? When was the last time you condemned the corruption of the powerful? When was the last time you challenged your audience to stand against evil instead of just waiting for blessings?" The church fell into a heavy silence. Even the cameras seemed to hesitate in their recording. Joel took a deep breath, trying to keep the conversation on track. "I believe in God's goodness," he answered slowly. "I believe people need encouragement, not condemnation. That's what I try to bring." Traoré nodded, but his reply was sharp. "Encouragement without truth is like medicine without the cure. It numbs the pain but never heals the disease. Christianity was not built on comfort, it was built on blood, sweat, and tears. The early Christians were persecuted, hunted, killed, because they stood for something greater than themselves. And yet, in this modern age, Christianity has been commercialized into a brand. Preachers fly private jets while children starve. Churches build monuments of gold while the poor sleep on sidewalks outside their doors. Is this the Christianity Christ died for? Or is this a marketplace built in his name? The audience erupted, some clapping wildly, some booing, others whispering heatedly. Social media feeds began exploding as millions watched live across the world. Hashtags began trending within minutes. Hashtag TraorSpeaks, hashtag JoelStraor, hashtag ChristianityTruth. Joel raised his hand to calm the crowd. Mr. President, I respect your passion. But don't you think you're being a little harsh? After all, churches do a lot of good. We help communities, we feed the poor, we bring people together. Traoré's eyes narrowed. And yet the poor remain poor. And yet injustice remains untouched. And yet corruption thrives unchecked. Tell me, Joel, how many times have you stood before the rich and told them to change their ways? How many times have you stood before your government and demanded justice for the oppressed? The Bible you preach from says the love of money is the root of all evil. Yet many who call themselves shepherds bow before money like it is God himself. This is not Christianity. This is idolatry disguised in holy robes. The tension in the room was electric. Viewers online were glued to their screens, unable to look away. What was supposed to be a friendly exchange had turned into one of the most explosive confrontations of faith ever broadcast. Joel, usually untouchable in his calm demeanor, was visibly shaken. But Traoré was just getting started. He walked slowly across the stage now, his boots echoing on the polished floor. In Africa, he said, his voice lower but burning with intensity, we know suffering. We know hunger. We know what it means to cry out for God with empty stomachs. And I have seen too many preachers arrive with their polished shoes, their cameras, their promises, only to leave with the people's money while leaving the people in chains. And I tell you tonight, Joel, if Christianity is to mean anything in this century, it must return to truth. It must return to justice. It must return to sacrifice. Otherwise, it is nothing more than theater. The words hung heavy in the air. For a moment, Joel Osteen had no reply. The audience shifted uncomfortably in their seats, some nodding, some frowning, some already reaching for their phones to record reactions. But Traoré wasn't done. His voice rose like a storm breaking. Christianity is not about building bigger churches. It is about building stronger hearts. It is not about filling seats. It is about filling lives with courage. It is not about promising wealth. It is about preparing souls for struggle. And if that truth makes people uncomfortable, then so be it. For Christ himself made the powerful uncomfortable. Christ himself spoke against the hypocrites in temples. And if he walked this earth today, he would not be sitting in the front row of megachurches. He would be out in the streets, standing with the poor, standing with the broken, standing with the oppressed. The entire hall shook with divided emotions. Some cheered as if they were witnessing history. Others sat stunned, unable to reconcile the boldness of Traoré's words with the setting they had come to love. Joel finally stood, his voice slightly trembling. Mr. President, I hear your concerns. But surely we can agree that God is love, and love is what we must share. Traoré paused, staring at Joel, then slowly nodded. Yes, Joel. God is love. But love is not silence. Love is not avoidance. Love does not look away from injustice. True love demands truth. True love demands sacrifice. True love demands courage. And if Christianity forgets this, then it has lost its soul. The crowd rose in a thunderous, divided applause. Some were clapping for Joel's courage to endure the confrontation, but many were clapping for the raw truth that had just been spoken. The broadcast was now being replayed on countless platforms, clips being cut and shared with captions like, Traoré confronts Joel Osteen, and The Night Christianity was challenged. What was meant to be an evening of shared encouragement had turned into a storm of global conversation. And everyone watching knew, this was only the beginning. The cameras stayed fixed, their lights creating a tense brightness across the stage. Joel Osteen sat with his gentle smile, but his fingers drummed nervously on the arm of his chair. Ibrahim Traoré, with his steady eyes, leaned forward. His words came with weight, not loud, not forceful, but carrying a certainty that could not be shaken. He began by saying that Christianity was never meant to be a tool of separation, never meant to be locked within the walls of any denomination, and never meant to be a performance for men's approval. He spoke of how, in Africa, they had seen Christianity used as both a weapon and as a bomb, and how it often depended on who held the message in their hands. The faith of Christ, Traoré said, was about liberation. It was about truth. But too often, it has been dressed in robes of prosperity, stripped of its power, and sold to the highest bidder. The audience was stunned. Some applauded lightly, others shifted uneasily. Joel nodded politely, but inside he felt the challenge pressing against his ministry model. Traoré continued. He told the story of how, in Burkina Faso, the poorest farmer would give half his harvest to feed the community, not because he expected to receive more money back, but because he understood that love meant sacrifice. He compared that to churches around the world where offerings were taken again and again, yet the poor in those congregations remained hungry. Do you think Christ came to create millionaires? Traoré asked, his voice carrying across the hall. Do you think his purpose was to give people private jets, or to have men compete for the largest congregation? No, Christ came to break chains, to lift the downtrodden, to show the kingdom of God through acts of justice and mercy. If you preach without justice, your gospel is incomplete. If you preach without sacrifice, your gospel is hollow. At this, murmurs swept across the audience. Joel tried to interject, mentioning how prosperity was a sign of God's blessing, how abundance was part of God's promise. But Traoré gently shook his head. He reminded everyone of the widow who gave her last 2 coins, not because she was expecting a 10-fold return, but because her heart belonged to God. The kingdom is not a marketplace, Traoré said. It is not a transaction. It is a transformation. The weight of his words fell heavy. Cameras zoomed in on faces. Some looked inspired, others confused, and a few visibly shaken. Traoré then turned his attention directly to Joel, not to accuse, but to invite. He told him that his platform was powerful, that millions listened to him, and that such a gift was a responsibility. "Brother," he said softly, "if you tell them that faith is about comfort, they will never face their crosses. If you tell them that faith is about wealth, they will never learn sacrifice. And if you tell them that faith is only about happiness, they will never be prepared for suffering." Christ promised joy, yes, but he also promised that we would carry a cross. Joel sat silently now, his trademark smile fading into a thoughtful expression. The audience watched him, waiting for a response, but none came immediately. Instead, Traoré kept going, weaving parables of African villages with the words of Scripture. He told of a community where Christians and Muslims worked together to build a school, not arguing over doctrine but focusing on the needs of the children. That, he said, is the Christianity the world needs, one that serves, one that unites, one that sacrifices. Anything less is theater. The hall was still. A pastor in the front row bowed his head, visibly moved. A young woman wiped tears from her eyes. And Joel, usually the one delivering encouragement, sat as if the ground beneath him had shifted. He managed a soft, "That is powerful," but his voice carried none of its usual polish. Then Traoré turned to the audience and posed a question that pierced deeper than any sermon. If Christ came to your city today, would he recognize his church? His voice grew more intense now. Would he see his love in your streets? Would he see his compassion in your hospitals, his justice in your courts, his humility in your leaders? Or would he see empires built in his name, but not in his spirit? The silence was overwhelming. Cameras captured faces frozen in thought. Some clapped weakly, unsure whether applause was even appropriate. Others bowed their heads, unable to meet the weight of the question. Joel finally leaned forward, speaking quietly. He admitted that he had never been confronted like this on live television. He admitted that his ministry often focused on encouragement and blessing because people came to him broken and hopeless. But Traoré, with firmness yet grace, replied, "Encouragement is good, brother, but encouragement without truth is like giving sugar to a starving man. It may give him energy for a moment, but it will not nourish him. What our people need is the bread of truth, even when it is hard to chew." The studio erupted in mixed reactions. Some applauded loudly, others gasped, and still others sat with arms crossed, uncomfortable at the confrontation. Yet, deep down, many knew the words rang true. Traoré closed his remarks with a prayer, not for wealth, not for prosperity, but for courage. Courage for leaders to speak truth, courage for believers to live sacrificially, courage for nations to embrace justice. His prayer was not polished, not rehearsed, but raw and deeply spiritual. "Lord," he said, "teach us again what it means to follow you. Strip away our pride, our greed, our love of applause. Make us servants, as you were a servant. Let your church look like you again." When he finished, there was no immediate applause. The hall remained still, many too moved to react in the usual way. Joel Osteen, visibly humbled, reached over and shook Traoré's hand. His smile returned, but this time it wasn't polished. It was fragile, almost uncertain. For once, the preacher who always had the answers seemed speechless. The broadcast ended, but the echoes of the conversation rippled far beyond that studio. Clips went viral, headlines buzzed, and people debated across continents. Some criticized Traoré for being too harsh, others praised him for being prophetic. But no one denied that something powerful had happened, that a truth had been spoken which could not easily be forgotten. In the weeks that followed, churches and believers across the world revisited their own concept of Christianity. Was it about prosperity, or about sacrifice? Was it about comfort, or about transformation? And many, quietly and privately, began to realize that what Ibrahim Traoré had said was not just about Joel Osteen. It was about all of us.